again. You can't fool me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scallion, we can't buy time. You can't fool me again. Can't fool me again. You can't fool me again. Hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. You touch up line and I resort to crime. You can't fool me again.
What we gonna eat no money, what we at you, eat no at you. Covid money, miss away in the yellow rat you. Use the youth, the money, waste a must a man to statue. Say me like a catch you, but we got in a figure you. Take the script and money, gal and say that it's not you. One day the man above me up, him a got up. Too much eating at the kitchen, some a fly by like a patu. When singers and DJs and social media's coming at you.
It burn me.
300% raise.
It burn me.
Garbage pile up the day.
It burn me.
Give the teacher them raise.
It burn me.
I see corruption please.
It burn me.
Mash down the people them house.
It burn me.
Every day appear arms out.
It burn me.
Appear money them a thief.
It burn me.
And them a sell out the beach.
Can't fool me again. You can't fool me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scallion, we can't buy time. You can't fool me again. Can't fool me again. You can't fool me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. You touch up line and I resort to crime. You can't fool me again.
For me say big up all the charities and all of the givers. Some a go like say them powerful, me no make a bigger. The urgent the promises, none of them not deliver. Cut up the youth, the rap and they down in our river. Member bowl only and they lie them tell. Corruption smell and they pocket them swell. When police don't a market like Satan out of hell, go mash up people start like thief when them sell.
It burn me.
Or they treat the market man.
It burn me.
Or them a treat the cat man.
It burn me.
Or they treat the peanut man.
It burn me.
Or them a treat the dirt man.
It burn me.
Or them a treat the sun man.
It burn me.
Or them a treat policeman.
It burn me.
How them a treat soldier man.
It burn me.
How them a treat everyone.
Can't fool me again. You can't fool me again. You hold me down for a very long time. Can't buy sugar, we can't buy lime. Can't buy scallion, we can't buy time. You can't fool me again. Can't fool me again. You can't.
Good evening from a very tired person. Bear with me, I just woke up, went to sleep to come on, and then you know how it goes. Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Global Television. Good evening.
Stibbidim day, stibbidim day, stibbidim day. We in Global TV says certain kind of friend be no cape. And some informer friend we love Lake. We in Global, bona fake friend and bona tape. We in Global, we not promote them, we not support them. Look at them on the cheek, come here represent for. We in Global TV, check it.
Yes. Welcome back to you all. Good evening to those on TikTok. Good evening to those on the X, those on Twitch, on Facebook, on YouTube. Good evening and welcome once again to another of our evening's broadcasts. This is your program, The People's Point of View. You really don't need a good memory if you're telling the truth. You really don't need a good memory if you're telling the truth. The more they try to explain to us that there wasn't a cover-up in Melissa Silvera's death, it exposes that a cover-up existed. The very minute Julian Silvera picked up his phone and called Sergeant Doney from the Stony Hill police station. Or is it me, just a ton conspiracies? But we're going to chaka ourselves to a few information tonight to see if we are gaslighting ourselves or Fitz is rather trying to fool us when them opened their mouth and said there wasn't any cover-up. But before we get on to the Melissa Silvera situation, we'll remind you of the latest development in the financial thuggery of our country. But before I do that, I want to say good evening to Meet and Teach. Veteran, up. Good evening, veteran, and welcome over here to Global Television. Good evening, Jamaican Carlos. Good evening, Sunshine. Good evening, Beat and Teach. You're here already, yes. Good evening, Natalia. Good evening, VM. Good evening, Debbie Jervis. Good evening, welcome. Lovely to have you. Jeanette Bailey, good evening and welcome. Patricia Matthews, good evening and welcome. Good evening, VM, and welcome to this or evening's program. Stacy, good evening and welcome. Andrea Joan Hamilton Wilson, good evening and welcome to this or program this evening. Winston Dawkins, good evening and welcome. Prof. Gorgeous Lady, good evening and welcome to you all. I really appreciate your support from day to day on my live. Thank you all very much for your support. I want to make sure I do not leave out anyone who has hopped onto the live, in the live chat rather. How are you all doing? How was your day? Are you thinking of what our country been constantly put through? Been constantly, our public purse constantly gets raided, and then no answer from those who have raid our public purse. Nifty friend, good night and welcome. Good night and welcome to our People's Point of View program. Paula Facey, good night and welcome. Sharon Powell, how are you? Good night and welcome to our nightly broadcast. If you have not heard of how much money, if you have not heard the latest development of the loot in our public purse, for those on TikTok, please continue to tap up the screen, please. Please give us some likes and share whichever platform you're on. If it's the first you're coming across Global TV, please follow us to make sure you get your notification whenever time we go live. Carla Hayes, good evening. Over here, we mainly do live broadcasts. We rarely put out videos. So make sure you have your notification bell set. Whenever time we put out a broadcast, you would be one of the first to know. Let me remind you of the recent public loot of our public purse.
Meter portal JAMP views as worrying the revelation that some government ministries have been unable to properly account for trillions spent over a 10-year period. Executive Director Jeanette Calder says the permanent secretaries must be called to answer. How was the money spent? That's the trillion-dollar question being asked by Auditor General Pamela Monroe Ellis. In a Gleaner article, it was revealed that the Auditor General's department is being hindered from independently assessing how more than $1.6 trillion was utilized between two ministries and the Office of the Prime Minister, OPM. Those ministries are the Education and Health Ministries. Mrs. Monroe Ellis noted that for 9 fiscal years, spanning 2012-2013 to 2018-19, and 2021-2022 to 2022-23, Parliament approved $902 billion, representing 13.7% of the national budget, to manage and administer public education in Jamaica. However, no appropriation account was done. It was a similar case for the Health Ministry, which Parliament had approved $695 billion to. The Auditor General said the accounting officer in the ministry submitted 15 of the 22 appropriation accounts for financial years 2013-2014 to 2022-23, but those did not meet the standards for submission. As for the Office of the Prime Minister, 3 appropriation accounts representing an accumulated budgetary allocation of approximately $12.02 billion are outstanding. Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, Jeanette Calder, says based on the revelation, the country has been left in a quandary. She says the issue begins and ends with the permanent secretaries.
The permanent secretary needs to make sure that after 4 months when the year ends, she sends her report to Parliament to say, what have we done with the people's money? All right. When that don't happen, Delia, who's supposed to come and say, what are going? The people who get the report.
Yes.
Who are those? Are parliamentarians. So we have parliamentarians, for example, the Ministry of Health, for 10 years has not told our parliamentarians, told our Auditor General what they have done with our money. How much money we're talking about? Just a little bit under $700 billion. And that is a report that they have gotten every year for the last 10 years till it add up to $700 billion.
Let me say hello to a few people who has just come on. Winston Dawkins, Douglas Allen, Nicola Pitt. Who else has jumped on? I saw somebody else. Hello, M. Good afternoon and welcome. I saw somebody else. Raymond, good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to you all. Yes, our country cannot afford a lot of what we need. Our country cannot afford the upkeep of our public services, the upgrade of our public services. There's a lot that our country cannot afford because we just don't have the money. Oh, Sue McDuffie. Sue McDuffie, I saw your name earlier. Good evening and welcome to Global Television. Good evening and welcome. I don't want to miss anyone. Good evening and welcome. If you're joining us here for the first time, please subscribe, like, and share, so you will always be notified when we are broadcasting. Given that we country broke, we can buy hospital beds, we can buy X-ray dialysis, CT scan, and MRI machine. We can't pay nurses, we can't pay teachers, we can't pay junior doctors because we're broke. The country has to service its IMF debt. We are so broke. But how do you rob a broke man of $700 billion? How do you rob a broke man? A man who can barely feed his children. A man who can barely feed his children. A man who can barely pay for his medical bills. And that's the man that you're going to rob when you're telling his children we can't afford to even upgrade. The outdated classrooms. They wasn't built for purpose of today's classroom that we are using. No, but we can steal 700 billion. Is that 700 billion in US dollars or in Jamaican dollars? Because you know, so when you come to money, I have hard problem understanding how much it is and how much you're not talk about and in what currency it is. Because Prime Minister Chopper, remember the last time we had a declaration of his asset was $190 92 million. To date, we don't know if the Prime Minister was talking JMD or USD. But just like the mayor from Port Antonio, the maths in the Prime Minister's asset declaration don't add up. It nah maths. It nah maths. Rodney Reed, good evening and welcome. It nah maths. But they still can afford to rob and rape us. I'll go back through for those of you, and I will have to build back mine when I'm finished. I'll build another thumbnail for this show because I'm using the same thumbnail I used this morning because I'm oversleep and tired. But I'll go through the list. As you hear Janet Collar was saying, the people who are responsible for explaining how our money is spent in each of these ministries are the permanent secretaries. But on screen, you all know we have King Chopper and First Turbit, who controls. King Chopper, the husband, control a lot of our ministries. First Turbit control a lot of positions, such as she's on the Integrity Oversight Committee. She has a lot to do with the Constituency Development Fund. And of late, she is the Speaker of the House. She decides the questions get asked in our democratic parliament or not. But when it comes to do with this permanent secretaries, you have Chopper Chris. You have Chopper Chris Tufton, who is the current ministry. And what we are looking at the 10 years worth of looting from the Department of Education, the Department of Health, and from the many different departments in the office of the Prime Minister. Because we really don't know how much of the department, the swindle that went on in the Prime Minister's office. The swindle that went on in the Prime Minister's office, we don't know from how many ministries, and we don't know how many ministries is yet to say what is unaccounted for. But on screen, you have the current health secretary, Chopper Chris Tufton, who is the current Minister of Health under the Portia Simpson regime. It was Dr. Fenton Ferguson. Next to Chris Tufton is Brian Dunstan Bryan, the current permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health to Tufton. Next to Dunstan Bryan, you have Dr. Kevin Harvey. Dr. Kevin Harvey was the permanent secretary to Dr. Fenton Ferguson. So we're not escaping the People's National Party from the loot here, but we're focusing mainly on those who are responsible for 8 of the 10 years worth of loot. So those are the looters from the Ministry of Health, among others, not just them, among others. Among others, those are the Ministry of Health choppers. Mystic Vibes, good evening and welcome. Noreen Dennison, good evening and welcome. Walter Sauce and more, good evening and welcome. Welcome to Global TV. If it is your first time on our platform, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe so you will always be notified when we put out a broadcast. So those are the choppers within the Ministry of Health, past and current choppers. And Dr. Fenton Ferguson will also be under the hammer for 2 years of the 8 years worth of chopping, of the 10 years worth of chopping. Then we move on to Ministry of Education, where we have Ghetto Girl Favor, who is the current ministry, who is the current Minister of Education. You have Chopper Frightened Puss next to Favor Williams. Chopper Puss of a McLean is the only money of the $700 billion that we can account for. Why can we account for Chopper Puss money? Because we knew Grace McLean, regardless of the corruption that dealt with this particular part of the debacle, Frightened Puss Chopper of a McLean topped $148 million. $148 million was chopped from the Nutri product by Grace McLean when she Frightened Puss was the permanent secretary in the Department of Education. Since she was shoved out and pardoned and probably paid and all sorts of corrupt malarkey that you know that happened at our state level, you have pretty face Dr. Casson Troll. What I want to ask Dr. Casson, how much have you assisted in the embezzlement since you've taken on the position as permanent secretary in our education department, which billions has been chopped out by you, the very public officials, you, the very permanent secretaries, who are meant to be the guardrail of what goes on in that department, who are meant to be the people's eyes and ears to make sure the lines are dotted, the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed when it comes to transparency and accountability. Dr. Lovely Chopper, when it comes to accountability of our public funds, Grace McLean has chopped $148 million from your children fund, the Nutri fund, the milk powder and bag juice and bun where them give with diarrhea. Yes, Grace McLean, the frightened chopper, the frightened puss of a chopper. Grace McLean, frightened puss, dangerous chopper. Remember this morning I said to you all, a criteria that we need to introduce into our politics in Jamaica is the removal of your two big finger or your two thumbs for those who doesn't understand how Jamaican do anatomy. The removal of your two big finger restrict the amount that you can pick up and run off with it. You can still pick up things if we remove your two big fingers, but you will have to take less when you're moving. So maybe to minimize the stealing of our public funds, we need to remove the big finger of the politician them. We're not going to save everything. We're not going to stop them from thief. But what we may do is save a little bit more in the public kitty. Look at the state of our education. Look at the brain drain in our education. The other day, the Prime Minister was at Guy's Hill High School telling a lot of lies. The Prime Minister was at Guy's Hill trying to blame the students for not putting out enough the results. He wants them to put out more results, better results than they put out last year. But every end of the island you look, Delroy Henry, good evening and welcome. Every end of the island you look, our Prime Minister is preparing us for industrialized, not so well-paid slavery. Because this is all we're being trained to do, to be modern-day slaves, to be well-paid and well-dressed slaves. This is the economic boom that you would have people like the London Financial Times or the Miami Herald, who see the need to run with the propaganda that we are an emergency for power, as the Miami Herald would have you believe it, or the London Financial Times, who is advising Verona Shaw, good evening and welcome, who is advising that Jamaican political, Verona Shaw, good evening and welcome, good evening, that Jamaica political economic technocrats should be given advice to the US. Is the London Financial Times aware that within the last 10 years of that economic prowess that they're throbbing at Andrew Holness, are they aware that 700 billion has gone missing, is unaccountable for in just 3 departments? One of the departments previously run by the Prime Minister, Ministry of Education. A lot of the loot is from department run out of the office of the Prime Minister. Is the London Financial Times and the Miami Herald aware this economic prowess and economic boom, economic turnaround that they're talking about? I wonder what it would be like. I wonder what this economic growth, turnaround, boom, prowess would be like should our public purse not looted in the fashion it does day in, day out. They really think we're fools. But because we're not fools, we're going to always continue to talk. Because when we sit down and shut our mouth, them are going to say, go on, man, the boy is silent, man. You know, say the boy is silent, man. Okay, we're going to talk. Because when you tell us the lies, you make it sound like we mad when we hear the lie. And then you go on a whole twirl in order to walk back on that lie. But the more walk back, the more problem you will get into. Fitz Bailey. Jamaicans, when you say PNPs at home, ball, murder, ball out loud, murder. Not only the PNP, the JLP them to the whole of them a murderer. It's only our political class, and those aligned to our political class, can murder somebody dead in a their house, and nobody is responsible. Nobody is responsible. But I'm going to go into a few clips I heard on Nationwide today, and then I want to ask some questions after that. But let us listen to what Nationwide was airing today.
The 24th of January. I gather that the murder accused, the former MP, Julian Silvera, is being scheduled to go to court tomorrow. He's been a resident, or should we say a visitor, at not Her Majesty anymore, His Majesty's pleasure, in a lockup, in a jailhouse, somewhere in Kingston. Yes, for the last several days, having been incarcerated last week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Today, 6 days. And I see a report where it is being suggested and denied, that he's been given preferential treatment. The other inmates or detainees have to be sleeping on concrete. He has been given a sponge, while the others have to bounce it on the cold concrete. The police superintendent saying, no, not true. The sponge wasn't provided to him as any special arrangement. It was always there and was being used by the previous detainees. Yeah. Well, I gather he's due in court. He's to be taken before the courts tomorrow. And, I gather as well, several high-profile people are being interviewed or to be interviewed in relation to the investigations into the killing of Melissa Silvera. And I gather the line of inquiry being pursued is whether they tampered with the crime scene or assisted in the covering up of the crime scene or tampering of the crime scene. That is the line of inquiry that they are to be questioned in relation to. One of those being a current member of parliament and senior member of the People's National Party.
Ungrateful Lion!
Of the crime scene. That is the line of inquiry that they are to be questioned in relation to. One of those being a current member of parliament and senior member of the People's National Party. And I gather two former MPs, also of the PNP, are to be questioned, or should we say interviewed. One is currently overseas and is being told to make himself available ASAP back here for an interview. Yeah. Remember when this story took that dramatic turn in December? It was being suggested that there was an attempt to cover up. Well, you heard Fitz in that media conference last week saying that no, there was no real attempt to cover up. So if there was no real attempt, then it could have been incompetence. Incompetence by the first policeman who went on the scene, the sergeant from Stony Hill. But it is also being made clear to me that police sergeant took a photograph of the crime scene. And that photograph is proving to be very, very crucial in saving the day where the killing of Mrs. Silvera is concerned. Because it is that photograph that he shared with his fellow officers that provided the crucial spark to the investigation. Yes. And ultimately led to the police refusing to give permission for the body of Mrs. Silvera to be cremated. Because if the body was cremated, we wouldn't be here today. There would have been no post-mortem or nothing to do a post-mortem on. So, no cremation was permitted because to cremate a body, you have to get the permission of the police.
And where the blood clot this? And where the blood clot this?
Do you remember from in December when the story broke, when the pathology report came out? Global TV has always been advancing the conversation. Was Silvera planning to cremate his wife? And then Babsy uncle, once she is cremated, then everything is over. Was it that the reason why everybody wait bated breath to have Mrs. Silvera cremated, story over, dust and done with, but the police refuses to authorize the cremation? We will get back to that. There is a smaller clip I want to play before I get into the questions I want to ask Fitz Bailey. Let me welcome a few people who I've seen join. Ada James, good evening and welcome. Good evening and welcome. Steph, good evening and welcome. Anderson JP, good evening and welcome. I will deal with the Patrick Bailey issue, yes, but let me waddle through Silvera and Fitz at the moment. Nicole Gray, good evening and welcome. Welcome to this, your Global TV People's Point of View broadcast. Let me play a very small clip for you. Then we will come.
Fact, where this matter is concerned. You remember some years ago, the young, leave that alone, leave that alone, leave that alone. But in due course, in due time, that may enter the public square. Yeah? Anyway, time for the break.
Jamaican food, Eve Williams, good evening and welcome. Is the holder, good evening and welcome. Is Cliff Hughes hinting us or contemplating or has information that the case in the drowning of the 2-year-old Silvera in 2017 will see a reopening or an reinvestigation or an investigation into the drowning of the 2-year-old Silvera? Will we see an investigation or a reopening or a re-inquest in the death said to be drowning Silvera in 2000? Amazing Grace, good evening. Good evening and welcome. Will we see an inquest, an investigation, or anything of that sort, or a reopening of the drowning death of the 2-year-old Silvera in 2017? Let's look and see if anything is going to go down that route, and if they're going to unearth the crimes of Julian Silvera. One thing we're uncovering as this crime unfolds, awareness heart, good evening and welcome, is that Melissa Silvera's killing wasn't an accident. It was a cold, calculatedly planned. It was cold and calculatedly planned. But I want to ask Melissa Silvera's aunt a question. Yeah, we blindfold? Are tick pop off in for your ears? Or are you in the mindset, Melissa Silvera's aunt? Are you in the mindset that Patricia Duncan Sutherland is in, who said, we don't know who killed Melissa Silvera? Because it was said in earlier news broadcasts that when Julian was arrested, when they went to pick up Julian Silvera, he was getting ready to visit a party at Melissa's aunt's residence. I want to ask Melissa Silvera, auntie, from we've been asking this question, having this suspicion in public, our Una wait to find out who killed Melissa when Una hug up and rub up with the killer? I don't understand Melissa Silvera's aunt. Because if we, all the way a war yonder, can be questioning the glaring facts that are poking us in the eye, but Melissa Silvera's aunt is still able to party and dine with the murderer of her niece. I wonder if Melissa Silvera was murdered for asset that would have been split between Julian Silvera and Melissa's aunt and all of those who are involved in the corrupt. We just ask. Because when something look fishy, you have to ask. Because it not take rocket science to work out, once we knew Melissa was murdered, that Melissa was murdered. And while we struggled to wait and knew from the postmortem result, Melissa aunt, like a lot of PMP in the inner circle, would have known that her niece was murdered. And under the circumstances, it could have only been her husband because there was no break-in and entry. Been a good evening and welcome. The question to ask, did Julian have assistance in the murder, in the killing of Melissa? Was Julian assisted, had an accomplice in the murder? We're not talking about the cover-up here now. Was there another person that is involved in the murder? PNP people, which one are no MP gone a foreign since Melissa dead? Since them kill Melissa and step over her body in our house, which one are no MP gone a foreign? PNP seem to get in more and more into a piddle as they slide down. You know, see why the PNP them lock them out from the whole of the Sagwan? But let's get back to the 2-year-old Silvera. If the 2-year-old Silvera case is reopened, should unsolved murders, particularly against women, be relooked at? Be relooked at to see if Silvera is guilty of any of those murders or have any involvement in any of those murders. Remember, it was said that when Silvera was a legislator and he wanted one of his comrades within his constituency to come in line. It is said that Silvera shot the dog of his comrade and laid it outside his gate. That would be suggesting you be the next if you don't fall in line. Was Mrs. Silvera shot in her sleep? Was Mrs. Silvera shot in her sleep? Especially if insurance money on a killer for. Especially if the asset well Leslie dead left on a plot for killer for. I wonder if Mrs. Silvera was murdered in her sleep. I wonder if the children heard the bullets that night, Mr. Silvera. I wonder if the children heard the bullets. I wonder if there was a scuffle and altercation before the bullets. Fitz Bailey lied. When they say there was no cover-up in relation to Officer Doney, okay. Let me ask Fitz Bailey a broad question. In relation to the photograph that we're all being told now that is central to the investigation. Anthony R., good evening and welcome. The photograph taken at the crime scene by the police officer follow the line, the storyline. Draw initial suspicion and investigation spark then. Is Fitz Bailey telling us then, when everybody allow the narrative, when everyone allow the narrative to run in public for almost 5 weeks that Mrs. Silvera died peacefully in her sleep, was there a clandestine investigation conducted against Julian Silvera from the 11th of November onwards? If the answer is yes, Fitz Bailey, we will accept that. But if the answer is no, why not? And if the answer is no, Fitz Bailey, how can you say there wasn't any corruption? Because Officer Doney, Fitz Bailey, in violation of protocol, visited the scene on his own. In violation of protocol. It should have been more than one officer. What you need to tell us, Fitz Bailey, did Julian Silvera call the Stony Hill police station? Or did Julian Silvera call the personal phone of Sergeant Downey? Because either way, there's a level of corruption here, not following procedure. Why? Why was the officer refused? Why did the officer not follow the procedure? A sergeant. Okay, you say there was no corruption. Why did he take a picture of the crime scene? What brought it? What sparked something in him to make the officer want to take a picture of the crime scene? Did that picture of the crime scene involves the body of Melissa Silvera, or the areas of the crime scene that did not involve the body? But that photograph taken by Officer Downey opened up an investigation based on the news reporting before the pathology report came out. If that is so, why did Fitz Bailey and the JCF, after recognizing from the 11th of November that is highly likely, there is a high possibility here that we're dealing with a murder. Why then wasn't the narrative changed? Why then wasn't the narrative changed? The moment the police realized that this is possible, not a peaceful death. She possibly did not die in her sleep. And we have to carry out an investigation here. Follow the storyline. The officer, Officer Sergeant Dome, who went to the crime scene, took a photograph that started to spark things. Kennisburg, good evening and welcome. So therefore, they identified there and then, from the night of the 10th of November, something was wrong here. The bigger question that we need to ask, and not let Fitz Bailey get away from the scrutiny, the deserved scrutiny, is if the officer recognized that there might be possible something wrong here, he took a photograph of the crime scene, blood spot in the photographs. Why did they not do further processing on the 11th or 12th of November? Why did they not process further? Shauna Smith, good evening and welcome. I'm not care if them sue me, darling. Good evening, Lilith Foster, and welcome. If the officer, something alerted the officer to take a photograph of the crime scene, a photograph that has become tangible evidence in the investigation now, why was Julian Silvera allowed to destroy all the evidence of the crime scene? Based on their argument, the police knew something was wrong. Or if they didn't knew, they suspected something was wrong. Why was Julian Silvera given all that time when there's a suspicion of crime? They refused, because he would have wanted, if he made a request to have Mrs. Silvera's body cremated, he would also, as we've been told, resist a postmortem on Mrs. Silvera's body. But as a state issue, he doesn't have the power over deciding whether an autopsy is done or not. That's a state case. So therefore, if something alerted you as an investigator, if something alerted you that there might be a problem here, there might be a crime here, why there wasn't a follow-up? Why there wasn't any follow-up of the Silvera's residence on the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, where further evidence, fresher evidence could have been secured from the crime scene? Why was Silvera given 4 or 5 weeks? If there was no corruption here, Fitz Bailey, because your officer investigative channel went up. He took a picture on the crime scene. He discussed the picture taken on the crime scene with other colleagues. That photograph has become very essential to the investigation. So therefore, the police cannot tell us that they didn't aware that it is highly possible that a crime was committed in the Silvera's residence. If the police had that suspicion from the 10th of November, why was Silvera given the opportunity to destroy the evidence from the crime scene, to have undergone a full renovation of his matrimonial bedroom where the murder took place? Huh? But Fitz Bailey would have you believe, no, Sergeant Doney is not corrupt here. Cliff Hughes is alluding to incompetence. There isn't incompetence here. This is a sergeant. Sorry. This is a sergeant. His investigative channels perk up. It's for that reason he would have taken that photograph. It would have been for that reason he shared it with his colleague. There possibly would have been something Julian Silvera said to him which wasn't straight and was all over the place. There is more to Sergeant Doney than this. The Sergeant Doney piece doesn't stop here. The issue is we should not allow Fitz Bailey to draw the white sheet to cover up the JCF side of the corruption. Were they all waiting with bated breath to see if the pathologists would go along with the heist? What if the pathologists went along? Then the police probably would have given Julian Silvera the permission to cremate his wife's body. Cremate his wife's body, bullet fragment and everything, get rid of. Julian take him ashes and go throw it over gully. And everything is done. Even if the story is surface that Mrs. Silvera was murdered, after that, you couldn't prove it because there isn't a body to do a postmortem. I've been running this cremation argument from in December because you've got to understand the mind of a cold-hearted criminal. And more, this unfolds. It is showing us that this was a cold, calculated, meditative killing done by a cold-hearted killer. Peter Bunting. If Peter Bunting and his wife was at the Silvera's residence, or whichever other People's National Party MP step over Melissa Silvera's body the night of the 10th of November, Julian Silvera's sister and anybody else who have stepped over Melissa's body on the night of the 10th of November, turn yourself into the police, because if you not escape legal justice, you will all not escape public justice, because we will all try you all, hang, draw, and quarter you in public, like you all did to Miss Silvera in private. Step over her dead body while covering up the killing. You see why the People's National Party is so tight-lipped? Because there's so much involvement. They're so highly involved in the killing and the cover-up, if not the killing, the cover-up of Melissa's killing. Because if Peter Bunting and his wife did the on scene after the murder, Mark Golden knew. When Mark Golden tell with a lie, Say Melissa dead with Jolan next to our side. When Bobby Montague tell with a lie, they knew it was a murder. They were asked to assist in the cover-up of the murder, to sidetrack us, because from politicians says it. Wow, 64 of you on TikTok tonight. Amazing. Thank you very much for the support on TikTok. Keep tapping up the screen, please, and give us your support. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your support on TikTok tonight. Please keep tapping up the screen on TikTok, please. I really appreciate your support. This is why the People's National Party is so tight-lipped. A lot of them, Miguel Phillips, have been questioned already by the police. It is said that a whole fleet of SUVs was going and coming from the Silvera's residence on the night of the 10th of November, 2003. A whole heap of knowing in the political spheres drive SUV. Who were the persons, who were the political representatives from the People's National Party, the high-profile one, them, who visited the bloody scene, who stepped over Mrs. Silvera's dead body in the pursuit of protecting Julian's crime. All of these People's National Party representatives must go to prison. And sooner rather than later, we should know who all of these criminals are. Because the cover-up of a crime, is worse than the crime. Does anyone from the People's National Party know which one on an MP gone foreign since them kill Melissa? Or which one on an MP them attack say, get told to come back home? Has the police managed yet to speak to Aniska Bunting? And if Aniska Bunting is refusing to speak to the police, shouldn't the police arrest and question Mrs. Bunting as a part of the investigation into the cover-up? Who else is under the cover-up probe? This is our case. It's a state case. And it is us that you need to report to. So Fitz Bailey, if there's an investigation into the cover-up of Melissa Silvera's killing, or if there's further investigation with regard to the involvement of the murder, then we have a duty to know. This is our case. This is a state case. This is why we're not allowing you to corrupt and get away with it. Because we have seen where you, very own Fitz Bailey, have done a lot of this before. It was this very Patrick Fitz Bailey that assisted in the cover-up in the investigation of the murder that took place in Patrick Bailey's house. Patrick Bailey is a former attorney to the crooked Andrew Holness, who has embezzled billions from our public purse. I mean, billions. In our latest looting, 700 billion, of which many of that was done by the Prime Minister and his permanent secretary. It was the same Fitz Bailey that while he was investigating Noel Maitland for the murder of Donnelly Donaldson, he was having talks and drinks with him. Yes, Fitz Bailey, Minister Fitz Bailey, a man of God, a man of the cloth. That Fitz Bailey. It was the same Fitz Bailey that stared into the camera and told us that Reverend Moore had an accident, and when the accident wasn't successful, Reverend Moore then went on to hang himself. When Fitz Bailey told us that, Fitz Bailey, one second. Fitz Bailey had the pathology report, the same pathology report concluded by the government pathologist and the private pathologist from the Moores family. Both agreed on the same information. But Fitz Bailey came out on camera and gave us a total different delusional story. It wasn't until the funeral of Reverend Orville Moore that Fitz Bailey was outed when we were given the result of the post-mortem by Reverend Alvin Bailey. So Fitz Bailey has no credibility in telling us that there was no corruption in here by Sergeant Doney. Of course, it is glaring. Sergeant Doney, Maria Williams, good night and welcome. Sergeant Doney realized, or from his investigative knowledge, this may have been a crime scene. Sergeant Doney took a photograph. He shared it with some of you. Why was Silvera given the opportunity, after there was the suspicion by members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force on the night of the 10th of November, why was Silvera given weeks to sweep the crime scene of vital evidence? If the police wasn't involved in the corruption, why was Silvera given the opportunity, while the police knew or had suspicion they were dealing with a crime scene, why was Silvera given the opportunity to clean the crime scene? Weeks. Why did Silvera not undergo further questioning on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th of November? 5 whole days, a whole working week. No questioning. You refused permission, and he would have sought that if his intention. 82 of you on TikTok. Wow, it is growing over here. Thank you very much on TikTok. It's really growing over here. Continue to top up the screen, please. It tells everybody that we are here discussing the issues of our country, and all of us need to come on board, because Jamaica problem will only be solved when all of us are fighting the battle from every front that we can. Fitz Bailey has no credibility to tell us that there wasn't any police corruption here, or that Sergeant Doney wasn't incompetent or whatever, because Sergeant Doney realized on the night of the 10th of November that he was dealing with possibly a murder scene. Hence the photograph, hence the probe from the photograph. The photograph that has become vital to the probe in the killing and cover-up of Melissa Silvera. Who in the People's National Party is involved in the cover-up? How many high-profile politicians and their wife were on scene after the killing of Melissa? How can the People's National Party expect us to trust them? Yvonne Green, good evening and welcome. Expect us to trust them when they're all lying to us, they're all covering up a crime, when they allow the narrative, when members of the People's National Party allow Golden to came out and paint a narrative, when they all allowed the narrative, Rena, good evening and welcome. When they all allowed the narrative to run in public for weeks that Mrs. Silvera died peacefully in her sleep, is it a wonder the People's National Party cannot open their mouth to even condemn that violent death against Melissa? Is there a reason why the People's National Party, other than the covering up, is there any other reason why high officials in the People's National Party cannot condemn Julian Silvera, cannot distance themselves from Julian Silvera, cannot condemn the violent death against Melissa Silvera? This is where Global TV ends it tonight. This was your people point of view. We will continue the probe against all of those within our state echelons which continue to lie to us, mislead us, and continue to steal from us. The stark chance we have in our politics is whichever way we vote, we're voting for supporters of murderers. Because if we vote for the Jamaica Labour Party, they cover up the killing of Jermaine Jr. that was done by the Prime Minister's attorney. If we're voting for the People's National Party, we're voting for a tight-lipped Mark Golden and a whole crony clan that stood over the dead body of one of their very own in their political organization and spheres, one of their very own in the upper echelons of Jamaica, one of their Senandra lot. But none of the rich, powerful, and famous men or women, other than PJ Patterson of Upper Senandra, is really standing up for Melissa. Global TV will aid the fighting spirit of Melissa in this publicity of the crime and the greatest cover-up, the unprecedented crime of our country, the next flip that our country has become. TikTok, I want to really, really say a big, massive thank you to you all tonight on TikTok. You have really turned out tonight. Thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate your support. If it is your first time on our TikTok platform, please do follow. So whenever time we go live, you can always get your notification. We broadcast 3 times per day. We have 3 separate programs. We have our midday program UK time, which is At a Glance, which is broadcast 7 a.m. Eastern time. Then in the evening, we have our London Drive time, Lunchtime Global, which is broadcast 6 p.m. UK time and 1 p.m. Eastern time. And then 11 p.m. UK time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. This is the People's Point of View program. That's our final broadcast for the evening. Thank you all. Sunshine, yes, I'm going to soon start showing my face on TikTok. I just don't like the TikTok thingy rather, the TikTok green screen. But yes, I'm going to use a small screen in the box whenever I'm over TikTok. But I really appreciate you tonight, TikTok. Jamie, too cool. You just come on because I first may see you. First may see you for a night, but good night, good night, good night. Andrea Williamson, sorry. Good night, and welcome. Yes, I'm going to soon start come over TikTok, but I really don't like the thingy or the screen, the green screen over there. But we will work with it. There's a small screen when we can use. Because when I use that small screen, which is the better one for me, then my plain green screen behind me is shown. But it doesn't really matter anyway. I will still do. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. Thanks to those on the X, those on the Twitch, on Facebook, on YouTube. Overcomer, if you are here over Facebook, good evening and welcome. That is your area where you always hang out. Thank you very much for always being here and always supporting. It is really a blessing to have you all here. But yes, I'm going to hop off now. But this cover up. Let us continue our own investigation. We can never believe anything that Fitz says. We can never believe anything that our director of prosecution says. And we can never believe anything that our prime minister or the leader of opposition says, because we have caught them in public, many times lying. Even on the Silvera issue, the lies are so plain in front of us. However, they continue to tell them. A crime, I will remind you. Oh, you did there, listen. Okay. I will remind you, a crime is against a state. The crime committed by Melissa Silvera was a crime committed by all of us. All politicians in Jamdong drive SUV. Oh, no, nobody know which PNP politician gone foreign since Melissa dead. Because that one day, police summon you to come home, come answer question. You tap over Melissa dead body that night. So we want to know if Peter Bunting was unseen, if Peter Bunting's wife was unseen, who else from the People's National Party was unseen. And when Dr. Campbell said him never dead, were you there, Dr. Campbell? Me hear Dr. Daz, the pan Instagram are going like bad man. I declare say him never dead. You still not gonna stop me from ask. Who were there? Were you there? And if you were not there, who in the party pinch you and tell you what happened at Silvera House? Because we know how it goes. But don't think you're going to get away from the power that social media offers us in an investigative and journalistic capacity. It gives us the power to ask the question, highlight the story, and also have our own public probe. So thank you all. I will see you all tomorrow for our tomorrow programmings. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your support. Really, really do. Good night from Global TV, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.